I think the health bodies are predicting that you might have a third wave at the end of this year, but the intensity or the amount of patients that you have is very difficult to predict. So it all depends on how the virus changes, year after year. Some of them do, some of them don't. So it's very difficult to predict.
No rain. Folks, hello and welcome back to the Naren Agarwal show. Ooh, today's episode is one with a genius, literally a genius. This guy, the Times of India called him, has a habit of, has a habit of topping all exams. This guy is one of the brightest doctors coming up in India. I'm lucky to have him as a school friend from childhood. We used to play cricket together, but now after the grade 12, he went on to score rank 1 in all India medical entrance exams, which is called NEET. And after he became a doctor and he got his MBBS degree, he went on to secure a rank 2 in AIMS, which is one of the most premier institutions to become a doctor in India and the world. This guy that we're speaking to is literally a genius in the medical field, a prodigy doctor and medical child. Welcoming Dr. Ayush Goyal on board. Dr. Ayush, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for the generous, all these comments. Thank you so much.
Bro, it feels even weird to call you Dr. Ayush because we're childhood friends. I'm just used to calling you Ayush.
No, I think Ayush sounds fine.
For this purpose, but everybody, you got to call him Dr. Ayush. You don't have that permission that I do. Brother, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you've excelled, killed it in this medical field and what you're doing. Did you always know you wanted to be a doctor? Because you were really good at studies, even in school, and you're one of the top guys when it came to academics. But did you always know you wanted to be a doctor and that you would excel so crazily in this field?
So as far as I remember, it was a childhood dream. I always aspired to become a doctor. That's what even my parents tell me. Right from when I was a child, I used to say that I will become a doctor. So it was always there. Or definitely I was not aware that I'll be doing so good coming future. But yeah, I always wanted to become a doctor.
And why do you think is there a certain memory that you have? You can't pinpoint it. Is there something? Is there a story behind it? Why you were inspired to be a doctor and why you had that from childhood?
So I don't know how it started. So it was mostly like a dream, like a child, you have a dream, you want to do something. But I got more inspired on later on during my school years when I used to go with my father. Basically, he works in an NGO. So this NGO, it kind of conducts free medical camps in the different rural areas of West Bengal, especially in the Sundarban area. So I used to go along with him, and there were a bunch of doctors who used to, serve the people there free of cost, provide them with medicines. And so, that cycle kept on going on, and I got inspired by it, and it kind of became fixed in my head that this is what I want to do with my life going forward.
Wow, that's amazing. Like such childhood memories of you seeing somebody help really inspired you and put that in you as a child to become a doctor. Brother, I also remember though, in school, you were a different child in some sense because you excelled at academics and a lot of other people, were in the top academia, good ranks and good scores. But what was different about you is that you were also equally active and well at the field. You used to be really good at sports and used to excel at sports, and you weren't just smart in the class, but you were also smart in the field, which is one of the reasons why I was inclined to even be a friend with you, because I usually stayed away from top academic people. So how did you do that? And did you notice that within you that you're also really good at the field and you're not just bookish smart, but you can do other things other than the books?
I think it came naturally to me. Basically, I was not, too much focused on studies. It was it was out of interest. So when you do things out of interest, things come naturally to you. So I used to love playing and I used to love reading, definitely some subjects more than others. So it came more of a natural thing rather than, just focusing too much into studies and just too much into reading books and stuff. That wasn't the entire aim.
What's a subject that you hated?
Basically, everyone hates history, geography, and stuff.
History, geography, and stuff. I think definitely people who are very into science and biology, etc.
You want logic everywhere. You don't want to have some facts and stuff.
That's awesome, man. Oh yeah, what year was Akbar born in? How do I care? Ayush,
yeah,
I remember in class 10, you left Calcutta after class 10 and you went for 2 years to a city called Kota. In India, Kota is literally the student, it's like the student factory, right? for engineering and medical. 2 years, but I've also heard that Kota is very intense. Like it's highly competitive. The culture is very competitive. It's ruthless academics because of so much pressure. Is that true? Did you face that? What was it like studying in Kota, preparing 2 years, literally 2 years, just to clear an entrance exam?
So yeah, that's true in a sense that it's kind of very intense and it's very competitive out there. Just to give a scenario, like in school we are like 30 in a class, right? And in a section we are 30. So in total class time we're around 180 students,
Correct.
and there was so much of competition still there. So when you
Correct.
go to Kota, you realize that there are thousands and thousands of people who are going to do the same thing, who want to clear the same exam that you have to clear. So when I was studying there, you could say that I had 60,000 other students who are going to give the same exam with me the same year. So the kind of competition actually becomes very intense. And everyone's there, they're focused on their studies and they are there just for this purpose to read, and to clear that exam. So definitely it's very intense, and it has two aspects to it. For some, it works in the better way, in a positive way that encourages them and inspires them to work harder. And for some, they feel the pressure too much and then they succumb to it. So it has its pros, it has its cons. For me, it worked out pretty well. And I'm very fortunate to have, I got a good set of friends there who are all, very positive around me, gave me the positive vibes rather than the competitive vibes. And it actually helped me to excel. And plus, there are certain good things about Kota as well. You have teachers who are, really smart in academics,
The top of the
and they are
top.
quite help. Yeah, and they are quite helpful as well. They know how to go about things and they help you in different spheres of life. So I was fortunate to have a good set of teachers as a good set of friends who who kept me in the positive space of mind rather than succumb to the pressure.
Wow. Bro, like how was it like after like giving 2 years, clearing the end, going for the entrance exam? Did you ever know that you'd rank one? Like did you kind of know like I'd be in like the top, like I'm that good, like being there for 2 years? Or like was it a total surprise?
So basically, when I started off there, I was like, I passed on from school, like school 180 students in a class. I never came first in school itself. So you never thought that you will be doing so great after going there. But over there, you have these weekly and you have this bi-weekly exams. So yeah, slowly, steadily, I got to know that this is what I'm good at, and maybe I'll be doing good later on. Also, you don't expect to be first, but yeah, by the end of 2 years, by giving so many exams, so many mock tests and all, you get an idea like you'll be doing good. You'll be doing good enough in your exam. So
Yeah,
that
because
was the
you're
general idea
with
from
brightest
exams.
minds.
Yeah, true that.
Nice. So wow, that's crazy. When you came first, could you believe it? Like, could you believe that you literally ranked first in India, a country of 130 crore people, like 1.3 billion people? How many people take this entrance exam every year, Ayush?
So in my time when I gave the exam, it was roughly 5 or 6 lakh students. It's
5 or
definitely
6 lakh.
increasing
That's like
every
500,
year.
600,000 students taking
Yeah.
the exam, and you literally came first. Like, could you believe yourself?
So it was obviously I was overjoyed. I was too excited after I got my results. But
Yeah.
actually after I gave the exam, we kind of check our marks and we know what we're gonna do. And in the institution which I was a part of in Kota, they kind of told me that yeah, my marks, they'll be fairing the top 10. So I had a brief idea that I'll be doing so good, but definitely coming first was a big surprise. I was really excited and really happy about it.
That is insane. I'm getting excited about just talking about it right now. Bro, okay. So 4 years of medical school. Where did you end up going for your medical degree?
So I study in Delhi. That's the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I did my MBBS from there. It's
Okay, so
like
you did
four
your
years of
MBBS from the
study.
top of the top.
All India Institute of Medical Sciences,
All
New
India
Delhi.
Institute of Medical Sciences. So that's where you went because you were ranked one. So you went to the best. And how was the 4 year MBBS degree? How was that in your experience? Is it like what we see in like movies like Munna Bhai MBBS, or like how is it like to study in the top premier medical institute? Do you get time to have fun? Are the professors cool?
Yeah, you're pretty cool. I mean, life is very different from what we see in movies and stuff. It's a normal college life. You have your academics, you go to the clinics, you see patients, but then you get an ample amount of time, for your co-curricular activities and for pursuing other things. So people who are doing MBBS, they don't just end up becoming doctors. Some of them actually change their fields and they go into IAS. Some of them even pursue MBA later in life, or some of them may even pursue music and something else. So it gives you ample amount of time to explore yourself. It's like any other college.
Yeah. What are some co-curricular activities that you engaged in that kept you also like going alive and feeling well when you got bored from academics? Because of course, after so much rigor, you need some break time. So what are some things that you did in your MBBS?
So I in my MBBS, one was playing cricket. So we used to have this inter semester, like the different years, inter semester college cricket tournaments that used to happen every year in the month of Feb. So I used to participate in that, and along with that, so we had this yearly fest that was known as the Pulse. Okay, so the Pulse, and it starts with something as a P Wave. So basically, it's a dance drama that used to happen for about 45 minutes. So I used to participate in that every year. I used to dance, though that
What?
might sound a bit weird. Yeah,
That's awesome.
and in one of my years when I was in third year college, I was kind of the head of that thing. So I kind of organized that dance drama. I decided what songs and what script and everything to be done. That
Wow.
was one of my most cherishable moments of college life.
Bro, that's actually very unique. Really, like in my experience, most people who come rank one, rank two, who like just super academics, they're very far away from cricket and dance. Like it's pretty awesome that you can do that. I don't know how you do that. I mean, maybe I'll discover as we speak. So now, after a 4 year degree, after you're done with your
Yeah.
MBBS, you go for a postgraduate in India, right? You go for a
Yeah.
specialization. Um, for the specialization, you got to take another entrance exam, which is the
Yeah. True.
PG, right? Which is NEET
Yeah.
PG, or like which is the, or you can take the AIMS exam. Now you
Yeah.
take the toughest exam, which is the AIMS exam, and then you again score rank two all India. How many people take this exam, Ayush?
It's around 60,000 people, I guess.
60,000 people, because
6,000 to
it's
one
only
year.
the
Yeah.
creme de la creme taking this exam, and then you score rank two. Bro, so do you regret coming rank two, not rank one?
No, dude, not at all. I'm glad that I came rank two. Basically, the importance of the rank would be to select a field of your choice and the college of your choice. And rank two was good enough for that. So I'm glad I was second. I don't regret anything at all.
And what field did you end up selecting? Like, what are you planning to pursue now that, and it's been 3 years since you've in your postgraduate degree. So it's been 7 years that you've been heavily
Yeah.
involved as a doctor and totally in the medical sciences. What field is it for you and why do you want to pursue it?
So right now, what I'm doing is known as internal medicine. So that is my post graduation will get over this year in December. After that, I'll have to give another exam to go for a sub-specialization. So I am wanting to go ahead with pulmonology and critical care. Basically, I
Wow.
like the thrill of working in the ICU and taking care of patients who are actually really sick, where instantaneous decisions make considerable amount of difference in the patient's life. That is what my field of interest is right now, and I wish to pursue that in future.
Wow. I can imagine like you being really good at it, bro, because you having somebody who's not just like been on the on like in the classroom, but you have had field experiences, like playing a sport gives you that experience, like taking instantaneous decisions. It's like an intelligence of a different kind, right? You got to really like switch your strategy all of a
Yeah.
sudden, and stuff like that really helps in intense situations in actual life as well, when you're really good at sports and you play sports. um Ayush, what I want to ask you is, you talked about pulmonology, etc. I want to
Yeah.
ask you one question, and then I want to get into like some current, recent medical hot topics, COVID, etc. So, what has been the biggest thing that being in this line of medicine has given you? Has it given you confidence? Has it given you a sense of like being able to serve? What is the biggest thing that you get out of being a doctor?
I
Is
think
it
it's
money? I mean, you can be
satisfaction.
honest. Yeah.
So right now, money, I won't say, because I'm still working as a resident in my own college, so it's not about the money right now. But what it gives is a lot of sense of satisfaction. You get satisfaction on a daily basis, rather than even on an hourly basis, when you see one patient after the other. So every patient, it kinds of teaches you something. It's not at all a monotonous job. You're having something different to encounter every day, so it's definitely thrilling and interesting and entertaining. And the second aspect to it is it's really satisfying. The patients, they get better, their family members get, they feel happy that their patients have survived and they are going out of the hospital, and they realize that what a difference you have made to their life. That reaction on their faces is actually really satisfying.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing, man. Now, getting to part two, like the hot topics I want to talk to you about, and some questions that I have in general about the medical industry and stuff. So, Ayush, a lot of people ask doctors, hey, what advice? How can we get better at COVID, etc., etc. But I want to get your perspective. How was it serving as a COVID doctor in COVID wards? I remember last time the pandemic hit in 2020, you said like you were drained, you were working hours and hours. Even now you're on COVID duty. Is it something that you hear from people is actually unprecedented. Have they faced such situations before? What is it like being a doctor in COVID times and being on COVID duty?
So it's something that we didn't even imagine maybe a year back. We never thought that some kind of a situation like this, would come and we have to work for such long hours wearing all that protective equipment and taking care of patients, and you have patients dying outside the hospital's doors, not getting enough beds. So this kind of a situation was never imagined of. So what I feel the most difficult aspect, of doing COVID duties is actually feeling helpless. There are multiple reasons to it. First of all, the beds, the amount of oxygen, it's not in your hands, right? But you see people suffering because of it. You see people dying because of it. So every day you enter the ward, some patients would succumb to their illness. The amount of deaths that you're seeing on a daily basis, it takes a lot of, it's a lot of mental strain on you. And the second thing is you're working with all the protective equipment. It's really hot and it's draining you mentally as well as physically. So the physical as well as the mental part of it, it's both of them. It's there and it's kind of burns you out.
Oof. At the peak of like COVID duty, how many hours were you doing in a day?
So I think the number of hours that we were working was restricted because it's definitely not practically feasible to make you work in the protective equipment for more than 8 or 10 hours in a stretch. The reason being you can't have water, you can't use the washroom, because you can't remove that
What?
equipment and go out. So once you're done inside wearing that equipment, you cannot come out. So that 6, 8, or 10 hours, whatever shift you have to work there without having sips of water, without using the washroom. So generally, the number of hours was not a lot because that was not practically feasible at all.
But that's crazy to be like once going in and not having water, food, or being able to go to the washroom for hours because you have that protective equipment and gear on. And it's also like every day facing COVID patients, you are also putting yourself at risk. However, the amount of protective equipment. Did you end up actually contracting COVID and did you have a tough time fighting it? Like, what was it like when you got COVID? Were you actually scared of it because you've seen so much of it around? What was your take?
So I contracted COVID last year in July. So I was working in the COVID areas before that, and maybe
Yeah.
that's the reason why I contracted it. But fortunately, I did not have a very severe form of disease. It was mostly mild, just fever, which went away in a couple of days. So I did quite well, and I recovered. I recovered completely in a week's time. So it wasn't much of a difficult period for me. And moreover, like being a doctor, kind of the things and the risks that you have once you get the disease. So I was pretty comfortable knowing that I'm a young person and I'm fit beforehand. So it won't affect me a lot.
So, is COVID something that people should be scared of?
Yeah, definitely it's something that people should be scared of, and it's important that we realize what kind of an impact it's having on everyone's life, and we take the necessary precautions because it's a general mindset. Only things that you're scared of, you care about them, and then you take precautions. So
Mhm.
people, it has to be honest. It has to be a bit scaled. You should not be panicking, but you should definitely be scared, and so that you take the appropriate precautions.
Yeah, brother. But I've also heard like that. If you get very scared, if you get fearful, like your immunity drops, right? And like if you start panicking, like your body is actually less capable to fighting disease. Like what do you think of that? Um,
So panic and fear, I would not say so, but yeah, definitely it amounts to stress, and stress does definitely have an impact on your body's immunity and your general mental well-being. So being stressful definitely lowers on your immunity, and even the ability of you to take proper decisions at time of crisis will definitely get affected, and that could affect your overall well-being.
Correct. Um, the second wave, the second wave that came to India right now, and it's going pretty intense. They say it's more lethal and it's more dangerous and it's affecting younger people. Um, but is it actually more lethal? Like, what does data suggest? And like in your experience of being on COVID duty, like first time and the second time, is the second wave actually more dangerous? What is your take on the second wave that's come to India?
So if we talk about absolute numbers, it's not that the virus itself is more lethal. The reason behind is that it's basically the burden on the healthcare system. So the first wave, we had a peak of around 1 lakh cases per day, right? And in this wave, like if you go back 2 weeks earlier, the amount of cases per day was around 4 lakhs. So you can imagine the number of people getting affected are 4 times of what we had last year with almost the same healthcare system. The problem was in the previous wave, we were able to manage such people coming to the hospitals. We had enough beds and enough oxygen plants and enough facilities to cater for them. And this time around, there was a situation which these amenities were not well prepared for taking care of 4 lakh new cases per day. So even if the virus is not more lethal, because of the absence of resources and the inability of patients to get admitted, those patients are actually, dying off before they could reach the hospital, dying at home, dying in ambulances, looking for hospitals. So that is what I feel has made this wave more lethal than the last one. It's not purely in terms of the virus. It's more about the healthcare resources that we have at hand.
Wow. So also, I think nationally, internationally, we were applauded like by the way how we conducted the first wave as a country, because it was expected to do much worse. But overall, there was a general consensus that India did a decent job at handling wave one. But wave two, it seems like came out of nowhere, at least to me, like just like boom, sly in, and all of a sudden there's this second India wave. What could have we done better as a nation to prepare ourselves, and could have we done something better to prepare ourselves? Like, was anybody expecting such a wave?
People were not fearful anymore. Like back last year during the lockdown, when there were like few cases per day, still people were back in their homes. They were not going for work. They were wearing masks. They were sanitizing their hands, and all these practices actually gave away in the early months of this year. And because of that, I feel that the wave, it became a much larger thing as compared to the last year.
Yeah. A lot of people say that masks don't work. Not a lot of people. There's a small group of people that say masks don't work, or mask is a form of social control. Like in America, we saw this movement where people said, like, I don't want to wear the mask. It's a form of social control, etc. Do masks actually help? Because people keep changing. The CDC, like America, said like first you have to have N95, then they say like wear a cloth mask, etc. Now they're saying if you're vaccinated, you don't need a mask. So what is the thing with masks?
So, in one line, if there's anything that works to prevent COVID, if there's anything in the world right now that works to prevent COVID, they are masks.
Okay.
If there's one thing that you want to do to protect yourself from contracting COVID, is to wear a mask. So it definitely works. So the recommendations from CDC and other guidelines, they keep on changing depending on the amount of evidence you develop. So when this thing started, you did not have a lot of evidence. So with time, you realize that even cloth masks or simple surgical masks, that's the 3M ply masks, so even they work. So इसलिए they keep on changing the recommendations depending upon the amount of supply that you have. So you always have to meet the supply and the demand. So you cannot make out general recommendations saying that everyone should wear N95 masks when you know that you do not have so much of it in quantity that the entire world can wear it. So you need to grade it. People at the highest risk or the highest exposure should get N95 because it offers the best protection. People like the general public, they can wear something that provides a little less protection, but still it provides protection. That's why the recommendations have to keep on changing. But definitely masks work, and there is a lot of literature on this that masks definitely work to protect COVID. Right now, CDC is saying that if people are vaccinated, they can avoid wearing masks, especially in places which are well ventilated and open. But even in closed spaces, they would still recommend people to wear masks. But that was only possible in America because they've kind of vaccinated a huge chunk of their population. So even me as well as you, we both are protected. But in India, even if I'm vaccinated, I might still send the virus to someone else, even if I myself won't get affected. So it's important that in India we still wear masks whenever we are out. That's important.
So yeah, continuing with that, some people also say the vaccine is something that they don't want to take, and they might they're saying like vaccine should be a choice, because ultimately there's a lot of controversy around like how the vaccination companies, the kind of laws and legality, they don't have full risk or exposure if anything goes wrong, etc. And some people say that okay, like the vaccine might work and I don't want to take it because I don't want to involve myself in the potential risk. And then there are some people who say the vaccine is a scam, or it's a big it's a big industry that people are just going to get vaccinated, people are going to make money, and it actually doesn't work, or it's some sort of another like social control mechanism. What is your take on vaccines, on COVID vaccines specifically?
I think the problem here is that people, they kind of get their knowledge from just media. They kind of don't want to read the true literature or believe in people who actually are well versed with this aspect of medicine. They get the information from media and news channels, which kind of portray things in a very weird fashion. So I would just request these group of people, a bunch of people, to look back at the history of medicine. Okay, this is like smallpox, polio. We as a nation have eradicated polio, right? We don't have any polio cases of the last 3 to 5 or maybe 7 years. And that is purely because of the fact of vaccination. So vaccination has been a strategy to prevent infections since a long, long time. And it is the most effective strategy to counteract any infection in the world. So vaccination definitely does work. You have different brands of vaccine, and all of them have been under immense scrutiny and has been shown that they all work. So they might work. The main thing that in which they work is actually to prevent the risk of you having a severe infection. So you might still get COVID, but the chance of you going into a severe disease or requiring oxygen and maybe intubation and mechanical ventilation, that risk definitely decreases by a huge number, by maybe by 90 to 95%, depending on the vaccine that you're taking.
Hmm.
So it is something that people should not be feared about. They need to take it. And I don't think so it should be a opt-out strategy, because it's good for you and it's good for the people around you. It's good for the community as a whole. So basically we have a concept known as herd immunity. That is basically, if a huge chunk of the population gets vaccinated, then even the people who are not vaccinated actually get protected. So even if you don't reach 100% vaccination for the entire country, still if you reach a major chunk around 70-80%, then those leftover 10-20% actually get protected. So it's important that people realize that the vaccine works. All their fear that they have, they can talk to doctors and get it get done with it, and they should not trust this media and these news channels. You just portray some random rare scenarios of people having some bad side effects because of vaccine, but that is not the true thing. So if you get vaccinate a million of people, a million doses, then maybe a very few, a handful of few might develop some complications because of it. But I think it's a risk worth taking because it offers you a huge amount of protection.
Some doctors, honestly, like some doctors that I spoke to, like on a personal note, they said they're going to wait and not take the vaccine right now. Of course, this is a minority, not a majority. Majority doctors have taken it, like you, they've already taken the vaccine themselves. They said this vaccine was released in an unnatural procedure. It was very expedited compared to how usually vaccines are released after like years of study and research. And so they themselves said, I'm going to wait for a little bit. And that made me a little scared. I was like, wow, okay, like these doctors are saying, and like some of them are not just like roadside doctors, some of them like run multiple clinics themselves.
So yeah, you can say that things were expedited, but that was the need of the hour, right? It's a pandemic situation. Things can't wait to go on. Yes, so there was a bit of liberty given to these companies to process things, but I can assure you that all the literature that has been there, and there is a so the Drug Control Authority of India, the Vaccine Control Authority, they have a baseline that needs to be met before a vaccine is delivered to the people, and only after they meet those minimum requirements is that the vaccine is rolled out to give to the public. So definitely the vaccine is safe. It's efficacious. Yes, maybe the process was a bit expedited, but it was all under control and all done through the right process.
Yeah, amazing. Now, one last thing, like this is a commentary that I would like to make, and I want to your opinion. What really like ticked me off was when India was producing its own vaccine, there were a group of Indians saying that I don't trust this vaccine. This is like some governmental prime minister making the vaccine, not realizing that there's a whole robust system that the Indian medical systems has. There's a set of doctors that go behind making this vaccine, and just to take out the vaccine, no PM can just give an order, say, hey, take out the vaccine, and they just take out the vaccine like that. And it really ticked me off, regardless of political opinion. But the fact that you weren't trusting a vaccine made in India, not trusting the doctors of India and the bodies, the medical bodies of India, that the world trusts. I mean, the world, there's no doubt that India produces the best doctors in the world. When I went to the US, at least 30%, 40% doctors that I saw were of Indian origin. So what is your comment to people who doubt India's capability to develop its own medicine? And since you're an insider, what kind of robust systems and people do we have in the Indian medical system who pass these laws and who pass such vaccinations?
So basically, we have a lot of different medical bodies, who take care of this vaccine production. So this vaccine production happens with different companies. The factories manufacture it, but then there is a body who kind of regulates everything. It makes sure that all these vaccines are put to immense scrutiny before they can be rolled out to the general public. So there are a large number of bodies like the ICMR. Then there has the National Vaccine Body. So all these bodies, they take care of all these processes and ensures that the vaccine is safe for the people around. So I don't know why people are, they are so skeptical about things made in India when the Prime Minister himself is taking the same vaccine that you're getting, right? So if there was anything fidgety about the vaccine, I don't expect the Prime Minister to take it himself.
Yeah. That's a great point. And like, I don't know why exactly, like people don't trust the Indian doctors. I mean, there's many things. Okay, yeah, in India we don't do perfectly, but like doctors in India, I mean, I would trust them because the world trusts Indian doctors. Just go and look around the world. Uh, awesome. Um, Ayush, with this whole thing, I also noticed that in general, people are wary of vaccines and like all these new medicines, like, because they kept changing, right? Somebody said, like, take this medicine, and they said, take remdesivir, and then that wasn't working. And plasma therapy, now they're saying, is actually not effective in helping fight COVID, all these things. And people, I've noticed, are okay, they are very, not always of doctors, but of big pharma. They're really wary of big pharma, like all these pharma companies, because there has been a unfortunate history of these pharma companies like really playing around to make money. So is that fear justified of big pharma?
So I feel, the problem here is people want to self-medicate. Okay, they kind of read the WhatsApp groups and they see news channels and they come across some new medicines with someone or there's some known to people who have, cured themselves using it. They kind of tell them to have it and they kind of try to self-medicate, and that's where the problem lies. So you have national bodies like AIMS itself who releases guidelines for people to, to read and to understand what's happening. You have big organizations like the WHO and the CDC who also send out guidelines on a regular basis. So instead of relying on these, these bodies who have been into this for years with so much of experience, they kind of rely more on WhatsApp groups and news channels and some random stranger telling them to take this medicine. And that actually leads to so much of havoc, like medicines getting over, people not getting it. I know people developing a lot of complications because of this as well. So what I would tell to people is that you need to, this is not your job to self-medicate, right? This is not the time in which you try to become a doctor yourself. You need to trust the people who are working into this zone. And there are a lot of bodies like AIMS, who release guidelines on a regular basis, which you can read, that you know what's actually truly effective for treating COVID.
Wow. Ayush, I want to talk to you about the impact of the psychological impact that we earlier spoke about, that doctors are going through right now, because it's truly something that they have not experienced in their life before, hours and hours. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's pursuing a psychology PhD, and she was talking about how there could be a whole array of doctors who go through post-traumatic stress disorder after seeing so many patients die in front of them, feeling helpless, etc. Do you see that? Do you see and have conversations with doctors around you that are kind of like losing hope, who are going through a very tough time that they have not? What is the scenario like with the doctors that you be around with and the community there?
So definitely it's having a huge psychological impact and the mental well-being is truly affected. There are multiple reasons to it. Firstly, definitely because you are helpless when you are there. You can't treat patients the way you want to because you don't have enough beds, enough facilities. There's a huge chunk of people who are not making it, who are succumbing to their illness. Along with that, one of the reasons is that because you need to isolate yourself, right? You can't make your family members at risk. So people are actually staying outside, not staying with their families, staying in hostels and flats, living alone, and they don't have people to talk to. You can just talk to yourself. There's no one who's understanding the kind of mental stress the doctors are into. And yes, there's a large number of people, who are actually going into depression and having anxiety issues and having these stress disorders. So it's definitely there. But yeah, a lot of different institutions like AIMS and NIMHANS, they are coming up with these mental health programs for doctors. And so we have different cells where we can go and talk to people about it. So these things are now being acknowledged and people are actually trying out things so that this does not impact doctors.
Wow. Is there something that you personally do to take care of your mental well-being, given the fact that you are on COVID duty and you have been at it for like more than a year now?
So personally, nothing very significant, but yeah, I ensure that I talk about it with my friends who are going through the same thing. So, kind of share your experiences and you feel that someone else understands you. So that actually helps. So it's important that we talk about what we are facing, talk about our problems, talk about the things that happen to us on a daily basis. That kind of helps.
Nice. I wonder if like spiritual practices like meditation, etc., because that's something that I am into, would help at all in doctors to reduce stress. Has there been talks about like doctors meditating and like practicing such things, or not really, or is that something that you have tried before for yourself?
So I haven't tried it, but yeah, there are a group of my friends and group of other doctors, who do it on a daily basis. So yes, you just need to believe in something, anything that gives you calm and peace. It's something that you should be doing. And I believe that yes, yoga and meditation is one of those things that actually bring peace and calmness into your life.
Wow. Thanks, Ayush. I want to now transition to a whole different thing of like the future of medicine, the future of human biology, and ask you like interesting, puzzling questions. Um, can we do that?
Yeah, sure. I hope I'll
Awesome.
be able to answer them appropriately.
Awesome. And I mean, of course, like these are going to be very silly, like, novice questions because I don't know much about the medicine and biology like that. So I guess there's a concept coming up where people are talking about they can freeze themselves, like their bodies in a certain state, and then wake up after 50 years, or like they can preserve their organs and go into like a cold machine. Have you heard of such things, like where people are talking about preserving their organs or like their body for years, like going in a certain state mentally and like in the cold chambers and then coming out 50 years? Have you ever heard of such things?
No, I'm not aware. Like, not body organs or themselves as a whole, but yeah, I think the only thing I've heard of is you preserving, the females preserving their eggs and the males preserving their sperms, for future fertilization purposes. That's something there. Or you preserve your stem cells when you're born from your umbilical cord so that you can use it on a later basis. So these
Yeah.
things are definitely there in practice, but
Yeah.
preserving your entire body or freezing it's not something that I've heard of.
Okay, yeah. So this is like, yeah, anyways, this is like very weird, like sci-fi sort of concepts that are coming up. Probably like far off, but just like scientific fiction that's coming on right now. Also, Ayush, I see there's this thing that you got to save lives and people have to be saved. Let's say someone's 90, 95, 100, something happens, they rush to the hospital and you try to save them. But when is a person allowed to die? When it comes to the medical field, like when is it permissible to let a person die? Because at the end of the day, to be honest, like there has to be an end time to this. So like how does one think about that?
So, that's kind of the most difficult scenarios that you'll come up with when you're practicing, because you'll have some 100-year-old, some 100-year-old person who looks really sick, okay, really frail, and you feel that that person just wants to, just be in peace. But then you have this moral responsibility of, trying your best to preserve and to do whatever you can to save lives there. So it's a discussion that's there since a very long time. Like, what should be the adequate balance between the quality of life and the quantity of life? So maybe you could do something that preserves 2 years of your life, but I'm making you in a morbid state where you can't walk and you're restricted to your bed. So is that life of 2 years worth it? Or whether I should just allow you to live for 2, 3 months, but in a better way when you can, do about your activities. So that discussion between the quantity as well as the quality of life has always been there. We don't have an adequate answer to it, but slowly and steadily, I feel that doctors and the whole community as a whole, even the caregivers, they're understanding this thing, that it's not the quantity that matters, it's the quality that matters. And it basically comes, it comes to the decision making of the caregivers, how intense they want us to be with the treatment. So if something happens to someone's grandfather and grandmother, it's the caregivers, the children's, decision how intense they want us to be with their care, whether they want us to, try all the different things possible, even if it has a lot of side effects, or whether they want us, to make sure that she stays in peace and pain free and has a better quality of life going ahead. So it's a shared decision making model between the doctors and the caregivers and the patient.
Wow, that's amazing. Ayush, I've heard that slowly we're coming up with machines and robots that can perform surgeries like very accurately. Like, literally like they can go and like they do a heart transplant, like complicated surgeries that would take a lot of human attention without human errors. How far are we from that? Is that coming? Is that something that you're seeing that like coming very soon, that robots like performing complicated surgeries on human beings with like less margin of error?
So right now, what we have robotic surgeries, but that's not actually truly robotic. What's actually the concept behind it is that at the operation table, you have the patient and you have the robot with its hands and the instruments working. But there is a person who's controlling it as a controller from outside. So it's more like a video game where you have a person doing things and you're controlling with kind of a remote or a computer apparatus. So what actually happens, because your hands, the amount of mobility that you have with your hands is restricted, right? So you can't do extremely fine things. But when you use robots, they have a lot of more joints and they have a lot of more flexibility. So it's more easy to control them and to make more precise incisions or precise dissections, and to ensure a better surgical outcome. So that is the kind of robotic surgery that we have. It's not completely human free. The humans are controlling the robots. So it's still there. And going to the future, I think more and more surgeries would come under this umbrella of robotic surgeries, because it leads to lesser scars, lesser incisions, and smaller holes through which you can operate and get the required result.
Wow, wow, wow. Ayush, what part of medicine are you very excited about? Like, what future of medicine are you really excited about? Like, if this comes out, this would be amazing for people and patients. Like, wow, or this would be amazing for doctors to help out and treat patients.
So right now, I think the most amazing thing that's actually going on is the COVID vaccine. I think that's the best thing that has happened in the last year or so, and I hope that going into the future we can develop more and more vaccines and make sure that we can counteract the waves that are yet to come. So it's very difficult to predict how many new waves we'll be having, but if we learn from history, then something like the influenza virus, which kind of keeps on changing every year, for which we need a new vaccine. So I just kind of hope that if the same thing happens with COVID, we are well prepared and we have enough vaccines to give to the people going ahead.
Okay, so I've heard this before as well. How many waves do you think can occur, like with COVID? Can it be a lots and lots? When do you see us going back to normal?
It's a very difficult question. I don't think so anyone would have an answer. But yeah, I think the health bodies are predicting that you might have a third wave at the end of this year. But the intensity or the amount of patients that you have, it's very difficult to predict. So it all depends on how the virus changes, year after year. Some of them do, some of them don't. So it's very difficult to predict. But till you have certainty about it that it's not going to be there, it's important that we take the necessary precautions.
Fantastic. Um, Ayush, I think we, as a nation, we do have a healthcare crisis, but we also do have a self-care crisis. I think a culture of health that maybe was there in our nation or was not there, it's missing. We don't have a culture of health. People don't give importance to like movement and using their body or eating the right foods or nutrition, because the healthcare system can only go so far in any nation. Unless there is a self-care system that comes in our culture, it's very tough to for the doctors and the healthcare system, right? What are some essentials people can do at their homes for self-care in this time to boost their immunity, to stay well, and to prepare their last line of defense? Worst comes to worst, if they contract something.
So I think what we can do as individuals would be, to make sure that we are healthy and fit. So by fit is just not, be having the right amount of body weight or the right amount of height. That's not being fit. You need to be active. So you need to be exercising or meditating or doing yoga on a regular basis so that your body is fit. And that is one thing I feel that we lack as a nation. Definitely the new generation, they have a lot of more focus on, going to the gym and keeping their bodies healthy and fit. I think that needs to be transpired even to the older generations and, to the middle and the older adults. Even they need to realize that it's important to be fit and be active. That's one thing. The second thing would be definitely eating healthy. We as a nation, kind of our diet is not the right diet, in the sense that we have a lot of more carbohydrates than proteins in most of our diets. That's something that we need to take care of. And the most important thing would be, to sanitize our hands and wear masks. So these are three things that I feel that, everyone as an individual should do.
Wow. Ayush, thank you so much for your time. This was a solid conversation. Anything else that you would like to say at the end?
No, I'm just glad that you invited me over to do this. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. I've watched a few of them previously. Never did I think that I'll be a part of it. So I'm really, really happy to be doing this.
Wow, that's a surprise for me. I didn't know you watched a couple previously. Thank you for watching, man. I appreciate it. Awesome, Ayush. Thank you. Solid time.